So this is the full set review for Magic Foundations. We are going to be covering all of the white cards and blue cards today, all of the commons and uncommons, as well as how those colors play and how you should approach drafting or playing with those cards in sealed. These cards are going to look a little bit stronger than the cards we looked at yesterday. Blue and white are both powerful colors, and they have weaknesses. Their general power level is higher, but they have weaknesses built into the colors. It's pretty good design. I'm happy with it. So we use a slightly different review system here. We use the Scuffle review system. It's a little bit more in-depth. Every card is going to have a number between 1 and 10. 1 is a card that you should never play under any real circumstances. 2 is a card you should do your best not to play. Sometimes you'll be stuck with them. 3 is something replaceable. Don't worry too much if you have them, but that's what you'll find if you pivot it into a color a little bit later. 4 is solid. Your deck will have lots of 4s. 5 is strong. You want as many 5s as possible. 6 is a card that you will play in a given color or deck. 7 is a card that pulls you into that deck. If you see that late, well, you know what you should be moving into. It's good signals. 8 is a card you should do some work to play. Splash it, change your deck around, pair it with the cards that it works well with. 9 says you're this color now. You're changing what you're doing because you have opened this card. You are going to pick it and then add a color or add an archetype. And the 10 is a card you always play. These are very rare, maybe half of one every set. In addition, I also give that everything will have an average value where it's most likely to play and therefore the order you should pick it at. But everything also has a floor value, that's the worst a card will be, a ceiling value, the best a card will be, and then a general amount of effort that is required to bridge that gap between the floor and the ceiling. Your job as a drafter is to try and play every card as close to the ceiling as possible, and therefore you'll have a framework for where you should take cards and when you should play cards with other cards in a sealed deck. So this includes like your deck building requirements, situational cards, things that you are building around, things that require certain other specific cards to work with. So we're about to cover all of the blue cards first. Blue generally has very, very bad removal, even though the cards are strong. And the cards are also really strong in the right archetypes or with the right cards around them. So we'll do this one last because we haven't covered white yet. Blue-red spells. Very generally, you need your payoffs first, then your removal. You got to take it a little bit higher, mostly in a red because your blue removal is so weak. Then card draw or general value. This also includes cantrips. And then either spells with flash or spells that are strong in general, like just power spells. There's excellent card draw available. But your job when you're playing blue-red, the thing that all the different things you can do in blue-red have in common is turning your spells into more. Turning your 1 mana draw a card spell into more than 1 card. Balmor is a really good example. If you play 1 mana, draw a card with a Balmor and 2 other creatures out, well, that's creatures you control get +1/+0 and trample on turn. You get more out of that spell. So you have a lot of options for when you're playing blue-red, and you get to generally make 2 of them work. So that's tempo. That means that you are just generating a little bit of permanent value every card. You can go wide. That means that you are putting out a lot of tokens and going around your opponent's blockers, maybe taking out a few of them. Balmor is really good for that. If you have 5 tokens in play and cast 1 spell, well, that's 10 power with trample. You can control, lock down the game. That's tough because the removal in blue is so weak. But the control deck takes better advantage of the removal. Like you get to do more with the removal you have available in blue in the control version. And then there's burn, kill him dead. There's actual bolt wave, deal 3 damage to your opponent's face. There's 5 mana, deal 4 damage to your opponent's face. You can burn them out if you have enough burn spells and flyers and card draw. Be a little careful because there's a lot of small traps in the colors. That's the main drawback to blue as a whole, is the blue cards are incredibly powerful, but have negative synergy a lot of the time. Like your blue auras that are removal work really poorly with cards that care about instants of sorcery specifically, even if they work with your prowess cards. And your flashback cards, yes, they generate value from the graveyard, but you're also having cards leave your graveyard, which means that you're not getting your threshold. So compared to yesterday, one thing that you'll notice with blue is the numbers are higher and the ceilings are higher, but so are the floors, right? So like the black cards tended to have kind of low ceilings, but really, well, kind of low averages, but really high ceilings. Blue cards tend to have a little more gap. And when we go over the white cards, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, blue-black graveyards. You need to take your value first. And that's not strict card advantage. There's a lot of different ways that you can generate value, but you need to have it because your removal, one-for-one removal doesn't get there on its own anymore. Then your interaction, removal is the best form of it, but this is including counter spells, bounce spells, tempo plays, then actual removal. And by putting interaction above removal, I mean there is ways to turn there's better removal and there's better forms of interaction. And then you're taking worse. I'm going to change that to weaker removal. And then your threats. So when you're controlling the game enough and recurring enough things, you actually need fewer powerful threats. So like yesterday we looked at a black 6-mana 5/4, that your opponent discards a card and loses 2 life, you draw a card, gain 2 life. Like if you're recurring that's you don't need as many actual threats. Try and figure out whether you're tempo or control. And by that I mean, are you just generating value over time because you're drawing cards and playing spells? Or are you playing draw 3 cards on 1 card and killing everything your opponent is doing? Like, do you have a creature in play when you start dealing with what they're doing? Figure out what you need to do on their turn versus your turn. That's counter spells and instant speed removal versus more efficient but more difficult to cast sorcery speed removal. And then figuring out how you're using your graveyard. Same deal, you want to avoid the non-bows. Like, it is difficult to have threshold if you're playing lots of recursion. It's difficult to have threshold if you're using lots of flashback, even with these powerful threshold enablers. Blue-green ramp. First, so the most important thing you need on your blue-green cards is flexibility. Cards with multiple modes, cards with multiple costs. That's to avoid the pitfall of having lots of expensive cards in hand without any cheap cards, or lots of cheap cards in hand without any expensive cards. But that flexibility is important. Then you need your survivability, especially cheap removal, just because that is difficult to find in blue-green ramp, especially because in blue-green ramp, your blue removal spells are weak. Your green removal spells can be strong, but only if you have creatures in play. So you need to think about how you are generating survivability. Removal is a good way to do it, but it's not free. Then your power, and then your win condition. How are you winning the game? So you don't need a lot of win conditions if you are playing a Tatiova and playing lots of lands, drawing lots of cards, keeping yourself alive. You can get there with a couple of win conditions because you'll draw those win conditions. As long as you can protect them or recur them. You can also splash really effectively in blue-green because of cards like Grow from the Ashes. There are multiple ways to generate multiple extra colored pips. You get to splash your double red or double white rares with 2 mountains or 2 plains. You can't do it all, but this is a great color pair for splashing. Yeah, but you want to figure out what you're missing in your splash. Like I mentioned, the removal is really weak or situational. You can splash more relevant or more consistent removal, or you can just splash for power. You can also splash missing synergy pieces. So Tatiova, whenever you land you control enters, gain 1 life, draw a card. That's very good with some of the white life gain synergies. You want the more powerful ones, but it works. And then you want to know how many lands you need to play. Some of the landfall abilities, like Tatiova, get really strong, but it's tough to keep playing lands after you have 5 lands in play. Oftentimes, that's a bad thing. So figure out how many lands you want in play, how many lands you want in your deck. Yes, so Ganj says, this Tatiova was a bomb in Dominaria. And it was one of the best cards in original Dominaria. Original Dominaria was about 2 full turns slower than this because we have heroic reinforcements. Boros is really good. This card is still very good, but it's not free. Like, you would double splash Tatiova in regular Dominaria and then play it turn 7 and then play 3 lands and be really happy about it. You had to play so many lands in Dominaria. It's not as good as it was in Dominaria. It's just a lot more work, but it's still quite good. And then I just added this because so yesterday when I did the green, I hadn't quite finished with the blue. The flash synergies you have available in blue-green are especially powerful. So like I mentioned flash here and flash here, blue-green has better ones. There's some very good flash creatures in green and some good ways to protect your payoffs that for flash in blue. All right, and then the new one. We did talk about the other 3 yesterday, but since we're blue and white are both new, this is new for today. Blue-white flyers. So, just as a quick aside. All right. Oracle. Fly. 40 cards with flying, or that mega flyer. There's a lot of flying creatures. There's a lot of flying creatures in blue-white especially. You don't have to know what all these are. I'm just scrolling for the sake of it. But there are birds and there are angels. There are a lot of flyers available in blue-white. Generally, you need to take your interaction first. That's not because you don't have interaction. That's because your interaction is more based on what else is in your deck. So, like, there's Banishing Light in white. That one is always going to be good, but Imprisonment of the Moon in the Moon is very weak if you're going for a card advantage approach. Witness Protection is great if you have the flyers, but weak if you're going for a more controlling approach. So you need taking your interaction. You need your catch-all interaction first, but you'll need to take worse interaction later. Then you need your utility flyers. We're going to go ahead and do that. By that I mean there's a lot of very specific answers attached to your flyers for free. It's like Angel of Finality, 4 mana, 3/4, exile target opponent's graveyard. That's a good utility flyer because it helps you deal with things preemptively. There's a lot of like flyers that generate a little value, flyers that generate a few cards, flyers that reward red or blue spells. Empyrean Eagle counts, like it just pumps your whole team. Then all of your other flyers is not that hard. There are tons of them. Like you need the flyers with extra text that is relevant, like other creatures you control with flying, get +1/+1. Then all the other flyers that are just either not particularly helpful to your flying deck, what you're doing, like filler flyers. You'll need a lot of filler flyers, but they're just a lot less important. And then blockers. You'll need things to keep you alive on the ground, and you need to keep them in mind for these top 4 because there's so few. There's so few things that block. There are 0 2 mana 2/2s in blue. You got to identify your playable removal. You need to figure out your archetype a little bit. So like blue has some cards that say when you draw your second card in a turn, do a thing. And there are cards that say when you play spells on your opponent's turn, do a thing. Those do not mesh well. They don't go well together at all. Like you can't hold up an Essence Scatter to counter your opponent's spell and hope to use that to pump your creatures with prowess, or hope to use that to draw a second card in a turn to trigger your triggers for that. Then figure out how much you care about angels. It's a very light sub-theme, but like Youthful Valkyrie is a 2 mana 1/3. Whenever you play an angel, it's a +1/+1 counter. Card's pretty weak as a 1/3. It's fantastic as a 2/4. So just know what types you care about. All right. There is not a Glimmerburst in that set, Ranger. That's something we'll break. That's a great comment, and we'll break it down more later. Up first, Aegis Turtle, classic reprint, 1 mana 0/5. It's good in this set. It's not great, but this is the only creature that has enough toughness to block what the other colors are doing in the color. There are no 2 mana 2/2s. There are no 3 mana 3/3s. There are no three. There's one 3-mana 2/3 that's otherwise very weak. Like, if you can get your blockers in other colors, you should. This is still going to be a little bit weak. This is not something you can play 3 of. But the thing about a flying deck is, like, the Flyers deck in the past has had really good things to do on the ground, right? Because if I have a 2-drop flyer and a 3-drop flyer and a 4-drop flyer, those 3 creatures together win the game. But a 3-mana creature, a 3-mana creature in general, like a 3-mana 2/3 flyer, that's just weaker than your opponent's 3-mana 3/3. So you have to deal with your opponent's 3-mana 3/3 or 3-mana 4/3 on the ground to buy yourself time to win in the air. Normally, that's really easy to do. But this set was designed with a really low number of... There's no lifelinkers to enable the racing. There's no target creature gets +2/+2 and gains lifelink until end of turn. Like, you have to buy the time yourself. You have to spend cards to buy the time. And Aegis Turtle does that. And usually, this is a bad way to do it. It doesn't attack. But in this set, this is pretty much the only way to do it. Great question, Numbskull. I forgot to mention this. I'm only answering I'm answering every question, but I'm only doing it between slides. It's because they really leaned into blue's keywords here. Blue 2-mana 2/2 flyer would be entirely too powerful in this set, right? Like, you can't let the bears with the keywords match what the other colors are doing. There is a 2-mana 2-power flash creature, a 2-mana 2-power prowess creature, a 2-mana 2-power prowess flash creature. Those are all really good cards, but they don't block well. They are just removal spells, right? Like, if your opponent is like, you need your one creature to hold off a 3/3 and a 2/2 rather than just kill the thing. It's just in blue. It's just in blue, Numbskull. Sorry. Yes, exactly. And Turtle goes well with card advantage. Blue is really good at drawing cards. And if you're spending 5 mana to draw 3 cards, you want to be able to play a land and a blocker. So, like, I'm paying special attention to Aegis Turtle here because this is a reprint. We've had 1-mana 0/4s, we've had 1-mana 0/5s, we've had 1-mana 0/3s with an ability, we've had 1-mana 1/3s with Defender, and they've always been terrible because we've had better options. This card is good because we don't have better options. We do have great card advantage. We don't have cheap removal. Yes, this is a relevant card that you will need sometimes. It's still a 4 with a ceiling of a 4. That floor of a 2 is if you have the colors for it. Like, blue-green doesn't want Aegis Turtle. Blue-white doesn't want Aegis Turtle. Blue-black might need Aegis Turtle. Blue-white does want Aegis Turtle, but there are options available in white. So, okay, Numbskull says, why isn't 0/5 good for card advantage? It's not good for card advantage. It's good with card advantage. And it's not because it's an 0/5, it's because it's 1 mana. So there's a classic thing that happens. We're going to talk about Glimmerburst. Glimmerburst is a card from Duskmourn. It's 4 mana, draw 2 cards, make a 1/1. It's just a 1/1 Glimmer. Why is that so much better than 4 mana, draw 2 cards, or even 3 mana, draw 2 cards in a lot of situations? And the answer is that 1/1 buys you time. So drawing cards with a spell is negative tempo, right? If I spend 5 mana, if I spend my whole turn paying 5 mana to draw, even if it's 5 cards, but if it's 3 or 4 cards, then that's a turn I'm giving up. I'm giving up a turn for card advantage. So regaining tempo or buying any amount of time with less mana becomes incredibly valuable. Like, I may not want to take turn 5 off to draw 3 cards, but I am a little more willing to take turn 6 off to draw 3 cards if I can then play a land in an 0/5 to keep myself alive. Really great question, Numbskull. Yes, the 1-drop, that's a much more succinct explanation, Carl. Card advantage has a cost, and it's a risk that you lose presence on the board, and this 1-drop is presence. And we're going to talk more about Aegis Turtle as I get to more card draw. Aetherize! Okay, this is a reprint. Historically, it's also been terrible. But it's been good sometimes. Aetherize is a set contextual card. In some sets, it's awful. Like in Duskmourn, it would have felt really bad because your opponent would just replay all their enchantments, get all their eerie triggers again, and redistribute things. The two things that matter to Aetherize is what can I do with the time it buys? Because all it does is buy time. Like you can think of it as like the fail case of this is Fog, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. But for 4 mana, that's terrible. If you're only bouncing one creature with an Aetherize, that's terrible. If you're bouncing 3 creatures, but all of them say draw a card when they come into play, or I discard a card when they come into play, that's terrible. There are, in this format, incredibly powerful tokens decks. Tokens are really good in this set. Exactly, Wingspear. Yes, being able to kill tokens is fantastic. Especially, we're going to look at a few cards. Like, there are spells that are just tokens. It's 3 mana and put 2 tokens into play. There's also 6 mana 1/1 that makes 2 3/3s. If your Aetherize is hitting that, it's pretty good. So Aetherize isn't a good card for you when your opponent has tokens. It's good for you when you lose to tokens. There is enough card draw and enough actual filtering available that you can play this card if tokens is a deck you can't beat otherwise. And there are enough blue decks where that's the case that you want to keep an eye out for Aetherize. You can also splash Aetherize in a deck when you really need it. Also, Aetherize goes up dramatically in value when it's best of 3. So after your pre-release, count your Aetherizes. So Aetherize is on the list of cards that you need to be aware of regardless of how much blue, regardless of whether or not you're playing blue. You need to be aware of how many Aetherizes are in your card pool, because you might need to side it in. You might need to splash it in your sideboard. Really good question, Wingspear. So, is Aetherize a good tempo play? Hi, Ben. Good to see you. Okay, also really good point, Ranger. So, what has to happen for Aetherize to be a good tempo play? If your opponent is attacking with a 3 mana spell and you pay 4 mana to bounce it, that's negative tempo. That's a mana disadvantage. That's bad tempo. If they're attacking with 2/2/2s, it's not great tempo. If they're attacking with 5 creatures that all cost 3 mana and they can't redeploy them all at the same time, that's pretty good. That is unlikely to happen. If your opponent gets to that point in the game where you are, like, if you survive all their 3/3s long without killing any long enough to gain tempo by returning all their 3/3s to their hand, and you're not in a situation where they can immediately replay 2 or more of them, like, then it's not going to be positive tempo. Like, this is a case-by-case situational card, but the main situation, which is your opponent has cast Heroic Reinforcements, or your opponent has cast Overrun, or your opponent has cast one of the multiple 3 mana spells that put 2 bodies into play, or your opponent has cast 6 mana 1/1 put 2 3/3s into play, then it's like, those are all situations that will come up that you will need to plan for in your control deck, but that's not automatic. So I tried to give it a rating that would reflect that. Like, this is a card that some decks will need. Average 3, floor of 2, ceiling of 6. But it's a lot better in best of 3, and it's a lot better when your deck is going to lose to those things. So Thane says, I wouldn't run one of these in the main board of a normal blue deck. Not by default. So I would play this if I had a lot of Empyrean Eagles and I was trying to just ignore what was on the ground. And I would play this as if I were a heavy control deck that could discard it when I can't use it. And when you're deck building, when you're drafting, say to yourself, do I lose to a turn 5 overrun? Do I lose to a turn 5 overrun or turn 5 heroic reinforcements? And if the answer is yes, then you play the Aetherize. It's not that blue lacks removal, Wingspear. It's that blue removal is much more situational. It doesn't fit into all decks. So yeah, that's Aetherize. We're gonna take, I can't stop the ads, so we're just gonna take a 2-minute break while they run, and I'll be right back. Yeah. You might be immune. A lot of ad blockers work on it. I did like how you added the notes to the spreadsheet, Carl. It's helpful for me. You're not gonna have to do it for all of them. All right, someone's gonna swing by really quick. You might be immune, Wingspear. There's also been an issue with displaying subs. You might be subscribed, and it might just not say anything. Oops. All right, 15 seconds. Huh. Maybe you are just immune, Wingspear. Congrats. All right, we're back. Oh, one sec. Well, we're not going to worry about it. All right, up next we have an offer you can't refuse. Classic card, pretty weak. Oops. Yes, so it's usually going to play like a 1. The thing is, giving your opponent 2 treasures is huge. 2 mana is a lot. Like, it's a 1-for-1 that gives your opponent 2 treasures. I don't think it's totally unplayable, but it's sideboard card at best. And even then, this is a set where your mana is valuable. Like, you can give the it's so difficult for your opponent to not be able to use 2 treasures. Like, maybe you get to counter an overrun with this, but those 2 treasures are going to let them kick a spell that they couldn't have or flash something back later. You could, in some, like in Cube, for instance, you can make this card a little bit better because you can counter your own spell. You don't want to do that, but you can. And you can't, there's not good targets for it. So that's the thing, Wingspear. Generally, like in Streets of New Capenna, late game 2 treasures were useless. That's not the case here. Like, you will still be spending your mana very late in the game. Like, there are 7 mana flashback spells, there are 8 mana flashback spells that you just want to run one side of. There are even situations where you will draw 3 cards and be happy that you can cast extra spells with that. Yes, if you can pay 1 mana to counter Time Warp with Lutri on the stack, this card is a lot better. Like, so I went through and looked through everything this spell counters, and it's not there. Like, if your opponent casts Omniscience and you offer you can't refuse it, that'll feel really good. If your opponent casts Rise of the Dark Realms and you offer you can't refuse, that'll feel really good. If you counter a Planeswalker with it, that'll feel fine. But it's not worth main decking it to do that. And if your opponent has Liliana, Rise of the Dark Realms in their sealed pool, go ahead and side it in. But otherwise, don't bother. Arcane Epiphany. Don't let this spell cost 1 less to cast. If you control a wizard clause fool you, you do not need a wizard for this card to be good. 5 mana, draw 3 at instant speed. It's just good. 4 mana, draw 3 at instant speed is great. This is a very important card in a blue deck, in any blue deck. It goes up, yes. It'll be an 8 in the flash decks. When you're playing on your opponent's turn, the majority of the time, this card gets a lot better. And we'll talk more about that as we go. But this card, like, if you have 2 Arcane Epiphanies, you're a little more willing to play an Aetherize. Like, a strict 3-for-1 is very good in this set. So we've had a few sets recently where like 3 mana, draw 2 cards, Divination was bad. 5 mana, draw 3 cards wasn't good enough. There are way fewer 2-for-1s available in this set. If you can get stable on Arcane Epiphany, you will be very happy. Like, a strict 3-for-1 is powerful. Yeah, it's got an 8 ceiling, floor 5. It's usually going to play closer to that floor. I should go ahead and raise the difficulty to a medium. Because, like, it's not free from a deck building requirement. But it's going to feel demoralizing in a mid-ranger control matchup when your opponent casts this spell. Maybe it is a low, but I disagree. I will play blue for Arcane Epiphany. Like, the thing is, your blue-green Flash is a powerful deck. I really want to play this in blue-green. I really want to play this in blue-black graveyards and control, although I am more willing to find substitutes for it in blue-black specifically. It's really good in blue-white, and it lets me generally lower the cost of my flyers. And in blue-red, it's very powerful because it lets me dig for burn spells. So I do think this card pulls you into blue. I won't like pivot for blue, but I will pick this over some rares if I'm a blue-black control deck or a blue-green control deck. Big Fin Bouncer, cool card. I'm not a huge fan of putting 2 toughness on my 4-drop. Whoops. But I'm very happy to, like, 4 mana 3/2 bounce would be good. If this were a 2/3 or a 3/3, it would be fantastic. As a 3/2, it's fine. It's usually going to get you some positive tempo and swap things. It will kill a creature outright fairly often. There's a 5 mana 1/1 that makes it a 4/4 dragon. Bouncing the dragon is going to feel great. I would love to be able to target my own creatures with this. But yeah, it's going to feel like filler a lot of the time. It's very good in blue-green. It's a little weaker elsewhere, and it's okay in blue-white. Cool card, though. And yeah, great art. And I like the flavor text, too. You know how to swim, don't you, chum? All right. Brian Horn, Cutthroat. So this card is really great. So the assumption here is that this is a 2 mana 2/1 with Flash. That's actually almost good enough already. And if it only, so the ability to grow past 1 toughness is very important, because there's a lot of 1/1 tokens, but you have control. Like, a 1/1 token will stop the Bridenborn Cutthroat until you can play a spell. Assuming this is a 2 mana 2/1, and you can just put a counter on it at some point over the course of the game. That's a 5. If you're a dedicated Flash deck and you can get 3, 4, 5 counters on this, this is going to be the best card in your deck or close to it. So it's a higher ceiling. There's also 2 mana counter spells, Essence Scatters, in this set. The more Essence Scatters you have in this set, the better it does. So I have a little link down here. This is how you search for all the things that trigger Bridenborn Cutthroat. I'll post this to Discord. I'll have a little bank for things you can search on Scryfall. Set Foundations is in booster packs. Type Instant or Oracle Flash. Rarity Common or Rarity Uncommon. Minus Oracle back, because there's a lot of flashback cards in the set. Oh, wait. I just realized that. Okay, so Think Twice is the one that's not on here. There's no Think Twice on here because of the minus back. But yes, there's a lot of good triggers for it. You might notice that the best ones are mostly green, at least in terms of cost, and the white ones are more expensive. You're right. Thank you, Ranger. All right, Cephalid Ink Mage. So it might not feel like it all the time, but Surveil 3 is comparable to drawing a card. Like, especially late in the game, Surveilling 3 might even be better than drawing a card. It doesn't draw the card right away, and it's weaker if you're blinking, but there's not a lot of blinking in this set. Like, getting what you need and making sure that you have 3 threats on top is really good. And this is true, Carl. You may not want to play it on turn 3, but putting 3 cards in your graveyard is something that blue really wants to do. The can't be blocked is very relevant text. So like it is better as the game goes on, but you're not too upset playing it early and digging for what you need. And you're not too upset if you're just playing a 3-mana 2/2 that mills you 3 a lot of the time. This is a good card in this. It's good in this set. Like there's just so many little combos you can set up. And if you're a deck with like, let's say you are a deck that has Brineborn Cutthroats and Dreadwing Scavengers, being able to select for cards that you play on your opponent's turn or flyers is pretty valuable. Great point, Ranger. So Surveil is comparable to half a card if you are if you know what you're looking for. But you do have to know what you're looking for that to be true. But the upside of this, the reason that like the fail case is better is that you really want cards in your graveyard. There's a lot of good things to do with cards in your graveyard, and there are cards with flashback. Like if you're a deck with 3 Think Twices in it, then you might get more than a whole card out of the Cephalid Ink Mage. Yeah, I like the 4-cost 3/3 Octo is close, but Threshold, this creature can't be blocked, is really so good in blue. And there's a lot of good little ways to grow it. Up next, Clinquin Sky Mage. This is a card from Eternal. This is just an Eternal card. Comment if you're still here. We have an Eternal card in Foundations. So this is you need to draw 2 cards before you're out of the danger zone. You need to draw 3 cards before it's good. Then it's great. So like, this is a build around. It doesn't look like a build around. You can't jam this on turn 4 and be happy about it. Like it's a 1/1 blocker. It doesn't block in the air. And then in the next turn, it's a 2/2 attacker. It doesn't attack in the air. But in the right deck, it's very strong. You need ways to protect it. You need ways to draw cards at instant speed. And that's something that you can find in every color, but it's not free in any color. If you play the draw 3, it makes it a 4/4. Great question, Wing Spear. Also, I figured you'd really like this card because Wing Spear. Yes. So it's not a free thing, but like, if I untap with this and my opponent can no longer cast Burst Lightning on this card, because let's say I play it on turn 4 and then they don't have a kill spell right away and I untap, then they can't fire a Burst Lightning anymore because drawing 3 cards gives it +3/+3. So like high ceiling, low floor, just be aware. Right. So yes, this is a card that does grow rapidly and becomes out of control quickly. Yes, cool card, but not free. Like you can't pick it early and jam it into a deck. You have to plan around it. It also like it is a bird wizard. Those are both relevant types. It doesn't get a lot out of either being a bird or a wizard. It doesn't care. You don't care so much about getting just +1/+1 when you're growing that much so fast. Elementalist Adept. This is blue's 2-drop. Like, I mean, Brineborn Cutthroat is a better one, but this is a good thing to do on your opponent's turn. It's a reasonable removal spell when you need it, and a 2-mana 2/1 prowess is just solid in this format. So I gave it a 5 for the ceiling of a 5, and it'll usually play near that ceiling of a 5. Great art. Yeah, solid 2-drop. Up next, Erudite Wizard. This is a lot weaker. You have to treat it like a 4-drop. Cantrips are not, there's only one mana cantrip in the whole set, which makes this card a lot weaker. If you're a control deck, this card is a lot better. Like specifically, if you are any kind of control deck in any of the colors, but it doesn't block well the turn it comes down. And you can play this on turn 3 and it blocks like it doesn't block a 3/3. You can play this on turn 4, it doesn't block a 4/4. If you're growing it every turn, it's a little bit better. Like, you need to take this after you have the card drawn, then that's pretty good. But you can't pick it over your Arcane Epiphanies or Think Twices. Think Twice becomes a really important card when paired with a lot of stuff, because being able to trigger prowess twice or trigger your erudite wizard twice is valuable. But remember that when you're drawing cards, you're not deploying threats. Yeah, this is a much weaker common. Essence Scatter is great in this set. There's a lot of things that you're very happy to counter, and blue is very low on actual removal, but being able to bounce something and then counter it is functionally removal. It's an uncommon, not a common, so you can't just build around it. But yeah, solid card, played in blue. You can play in blue whether or not you're the flash deck, but it gets a lot better when you have more Think Twices and Brineborn Cutthroats. Ooh, here's a much less boring card. Feybloom Trick, 3 mana, make 2 flyers, tap a creature. So good. Like, this is the kind of... I was talking about this card a lot when we were talking about red, because making 2 bodies on your spell is really good. But just importantly, being a non-creature spell for the purposes of prowess and triggering your instants and sorceries is valuable. Great card. So tapping the creature, like, you can play it proactively on your turn to tap down a blocker, or just you can tap down an attacker and make 2 chump blockers. It's flexible and it's powerful, and it's good with the cards that it goes into every blue archetype. It gets something out of every blue archetype, but it's also splashable in some other archetypes. And the floor of just 3 mana, 2 flyers is a 4. It's a good card. Oh, so if... Great question, Carl. Carl wants to know why it's worded this way. So if it said, tap target creature an opponent controls, make 2 1/1s, and your opponent killed their creature in response, the spell would fizzle and you would not get the 1/1s. So this is worded so that when you put the 1/1s into play, then it taps the creature. And that way they don't get... A targeted spell with no target fizzles and counters itself. Well, it just fizzles its own thing now. They changed that 10 years ago and no one noticed. But if you... This way, they don't get to fizzle your spell by killing their own spell. Good question, Carl. Hey, Don, how's it going? Yeah, fun fact. Once upon a time, if I played an... What's a good card I've got? No, I don't have any targeted spells here. But for a while, if I fleeting distraction something, so, and then they killed their own creature in response, then fleeting distraction would counter itself. That's what fizzling was. So things like Multani's Presence, whenever a spell is countered, draw a card, would trigger. And then they changed that, and I don't even know when they changed it, because it was like, it didn't matter. No one cared anymore. This is Foundations. This is the next standard set, and it's going to be in rotation for 5 years. So it's good to know the cards. So this card is better than it's ever been. So the floor of fleeting distraction, this effect, target gets -1/-0. The best you could do with it is if I had a 2/2 and you had a 2/2, and I would make your 2/2 die and draw a card. That was so powerful. However, this is a color. All of these, well, not all of these. Blue-red is all about making your spells worth more, which by extension means that a lot of individual blue cards are about making your instants and sorceries worth more. This is the only 1 mana cantrip in the entire set. It is the only 1 mana cantrip in the color. It is the only 1 blue mana spell that you can play whenever you want. Like, this is the only 1 blue mana instant other than an offer you can't refuse, and there's no 1 blue mana sorcery. So, like, this is the only card that triggers your wizard for 1 mana. You do have to have a creature in play, Ganj. This is true. This is the only 1 blue mana way to trigger your erudite wizard. This is the only 1 blue mana way to grow your sky mage. This is the only 1 mana way to trigger your cutthroat. This is the only 1 mana way to trigger your Balmor. The only one in blue. There's a couple in white and a couple in green, but they're all at uncommon. It also puts a card in your graveyard. Like, cycling is something that you would be really happy with in this format. Being able to put one card in your graveyard and draw a card is great. This is a really good card. Opt would be ridiculous in this set. So it doesn't anymore, Carl. So Fizzles is its own rule now. Fizzles is a thing that was added to the, like, Fizzles is its own thing. So, like, in theory, you could have a card that say whenever a spell fizzles, because it is something defined in the rules. Yep. It wasn't always. Like, once upon a time, fizzling was the name for what happens when your spell counters itself to not having a target. Now your spell fizzles, and that is different from being countered. Right. It would have 20-ish years ago. It did 20-ish years ago, Don. But that's not, I think, shoot, I don't even know exactly when it was. Yep. Multani's Presence was the card that it mattered for. It's a 1 green mana enchantment. Whenever a spell is countered, draw a card. See, that's the thing. I'm not exactly sure. I think it was around Magic 2010, which was 2009, but it could have easily been in the year 2001 with the 6th edition rules change. I did a Dig Through Time episode, but I missed it. Like, that's how quiet it was. All right, up next, Grappling Kraken. This is a very good win condition for the control deck and the blue-green deck. It's a little bit weaker. So, like, the way to think about this card is it's a 6 mana 5/6. In a general deck, it will stun 1 creature. In the blue-green deck, it'll stun 4 creatures. Like, if your deck that plays the Grappling Kraken in like a normal control deck, and you're just drawing some cards, you get to tap a creature, maybe another creature later. You get to play Evolving Wilds, lock down 2 creatures. That's going to feel very strong. It makes this a powerful finisher. If you're the blue-green deck and you get to play Grappling Kraken on turn 6, then untap, Grow from the Ashes, tap 2 creatures, or tap 1 creature, put 2 stun counters on it, play Evolving Wilds, put a 3rd stun counter on it, sack the Evolving Wilds, put a 4th stun counter on it, it's going to feel like cheating. And you can Evolving Wilds on your opponent's turn after they untap if you don't need the mana to lock things down for an extra turn. Like, this is a good way to win the game. That floor of a 5, that's assuming you play at least 1 land after the Kraken. That ceiling of a 7 is when you can play a lot of lands. It's usually going to play somewhere in between. The warning here is that this is very weak in an aggressive deck. If you are a very aggressive deck, you don't want the Kraken. That's not because you'll never hit 6 mana. It's because you want your 6 mana play to do a thing. Like, it's just a 6 mana 5/6 if you don't expect the game to go after turn 6. It's tough to be a really aggressive deck in blue without flying. And I love this deck card in the Flyers deck because you want something on the ground that is dealing with your opponent's threats to win that race. But yeah. Yeah, I don't know why they call it fizzling in other games. I love the concept of fizzling. It's like, who are we distracting? There's no one to distract. Why did you cast us? There's no essence to scatter here. Icewind Elemental. This is a filler flyer. It's not a great body, but 3 power in the air is always going to be a card your opponent has to deal with. 4 toughness is relevant because it survived Braid. And looting is relevant also. Like, all this together is a lot of weak pieces put together to make an okay card. Slightly above weak. But, like, you're never going to be... There are just better things to be doing at 5 mana. It's going to feel awful when you play this card and your opponent plays a 5 mana 4/4 dragon with a 1/1, or your opponent plays a Sarah Angel. But, like, don't cut a 3 power flyer outright, especially in an archetype that values flying. Imprisoned in the Moon. Okay, historically, giving your opponent a land for a card is something that you are comfortable doing at 1 mana at instant speed, like Path to Exile, solid. Giving your opponent a land for 3 mana when they can then take the enchantment off and suddenly not be a land anymore is not great. It doesn't feel good. But blue's removal is terrible. Blue has really bad removal in this set. That's okay. That's not entirely true. Blue has a series of removal spells that are good in very specific situations. This is one of them. Dealing with a threat without killing it is relevant, or without putting it back in your opponent's hand. But like, you want your removal in other colors. Like, if you're a heavy control deck, you don't mind so much giving your opponent a 1/1 or giving them a land with your removal spells. And if you are applying enough pressure in the air, you don't mind giving them a 1/1 or killing or land with your removal spells. But like, ideally, that won't happen. This is the only reason this is such a high score with such a high ceiling, is that you're gonna find yourself really needing removal in your base blue deck sometimes, and you'll have to take this. I mind giving them a land too, Carl. So, Don, great question. This is Magic Foundations. This is a new thing. Well, it's an old thing that they're doing again after 10 years or so. It's a core set. So this will be in standard longer than other sets. It is slightly larger. And the idea is that it's setting the baseline for what standard should be. This is standard power level cards, much more basic cards in general. I think that's actually going to make for a very interesting draft format, but lots of reprints. Yes, this is a core set, but it's about half reprints, and I think they did a good job on the reprints. Inspiration from Beyond. 7 mana is entirely too much to mill 3 cards and return an instant or sorcery. 3 mana is not the worst. And you can return itself. So, like, this is better than other core set drafts. This will feel a lot better than other core set drafts, on. So this is 3 mana, mill 3 cards. It can return itself if you're desperately trying to mill. The flashback is not great. Like, on a lot of the flashback cards, you're pretty happy to discard it when you're looting, or draw 3 and discard a card, and then flash it back. But if you... All right, one sec. I think this is a fascinating design. I don't think it's very strong. There are some kind of crazy rare instants and sorceries. Like, let's look at blue, okay? The blue spells that you're looking to return, that, like, your blue removal spells are Witness Protection and Imprison in the Moon, and your Think Twice. Like, there are not good hits for this card in blue. You have to really want to mill yourself for Inspiration from Beyond. There is a good self-mill deck, but it's only good in that deck. Yeah, but I'm sorry, you can loop 2 of them. If you have 2 copies, you can mill it back and forth. It's not strong. It is only part of the... Thank you, Wingspear. It is only part of the dedicated self-mill plan, and even then, only when you're a very controlling version of that. But that's a deck. Like, it's not a default blue-black deck. It's not a default blue-green deck. It's just a deck you can draft, which is why I don't want to discount it out entirely. Like, if you get to be the blue-black self-mill rats deck, play Inspiration from Beyond and be really excited about it. But don't take it in a vacuum, and don't take it before you have your rat spells. You need a lot of graveyard effects and a lot of very powerful and variably costed spells for this to be good. So, like, this effect of mill 3 cards, pick up a card, it's dependent on what you're picking up, right? So if you need to have the option you need to be able to choose between a Burst Lightning and Essence Scatter and an Arcane Epiphany reliably for this card to be good. Or you need putting 3 cards into your graveyard to be something you're very interested in doing. The other problem with Inspiration from Beyond, if you get to the point where flashing this back is something you're interested in doing, you're likely to kill yourself. Like, you're likely to mill yourself out. I went a little bit. You're likely to mill yourself out with this, so just be very careful with it. Ooh, Light Shell Duo. This card was okay in Bloomborough. This is a reprint from Bloomborough. It's much, much better in this set than it was in Bloomborough. It has more of a home. Like in Bloomborough, this was competing with like Lily Splash Mentor and what was the other like so many rats, like even just 2-mana rats that drew a card. But this is a set where Surveil 2 is a lot better, where Prowess is a lot better, and where 4 toughness is great. And 5 toughness, surviving burst lightning is great. Like there's no good competition for the Light Shell duo, and there's no both keywords are more relevant in this set. I did like him in my auto deck Wing Spear, but like they didn't even go in every auto deck, and they were competing with other rares, which is why I was in the autos deck usually. Like it was competing with the 4-mana 4/2 that exiled a card and you could cast it. Yeah, like lack of competition and a slightly slower, slightly weaker cards make this a lot better here than it was in Bloomborough. Also, it's a rat otter. What's not to like? Up next, Micromancer. This is weaker than it was in Dominaria United. This is another reprint. Set foundations is booster type instant or type sorcery mana value equals 1. Yields all of these spells. There's not very many. We have a total of 4, 8, 12 spells you can get with the Micromancer. In terms of, so Micromancer and Dominaria United, you could get Rona's Vortex, and you could get Urborg Uprising, and you don't have those options available, or rather, it's a lot more difficult. If you have enough 1-mana spells that you are interested in, like if you get to choose between a Joust Through and an Eaten Alive and a Fleeting Distraction, that's fine. But you don't get to choose, like, your options here are Protection Spell or Removal Spell. And if you have a deck where being able to choose between removal and protection, or like removal and a combat trick, or removal and draw a card is something you want to do, go for it. Then it's very good. That's why that ceiling is so high, but that floor is very low. It's not free to have those, and it's hard to, like, you need 2 copies of Fleeting Distraction and 2 copies of Eaten Alive, because if you draw 1, you don't want to lose that option. And if you have those, Micromancer is good, and if you don't pick it. A 4-mana 3/3 draw a card is good as long as it's actually draw a card. You don't even want to have it if you're only short a few cards. Okay, up next we have tied for best uncommon in blue. Tied for best uncommon in the set, Mischievous Mystic. 2-mana 2/1 flyer. If it had no other, you can't see me covering up the text. I just put my hand over the rest of the text box to make a point that you can't see. It doesn't work on this screen either. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 blue fairy token with flying. That's crazy text. I would play a 2-mana 2/1 flyer in this set. I would play a 2-mana 2/1. I would play a 2-mana 0/1 that made a 1/1 flyer every time I drew my second card in a turn. The thing about drawing your second card each turn is it perpetuates itself. So like if I'm drawing 3 cards on your end step to make a 1/1 flyer, then I'm likely to be able to draw 2 cards on my turn as well. There's a lot of good repeatable looters in this set. There's a lot of ways to draw 2 cards on my opponent's turn. So on my turn, if I draw 1 card, like I keep bringing up think twice. If I think twice on my own turn, on turn 3, if I just flash it back, I get to make a fairy token. But if I draw think twice late, I can pay 5 mana, draw 2 cards, make a 1/1 on my opponent's turn. And those options are powerful. There's also good ways available to protect this. You have Snakeskin Veil, Run Away Together, and there's a white trick that gives it indestructible. When you're drawing a lot of cards, you're more interested in playing those. This card is very powerful. When you have protection and the ability to draw a lot of cards, it's going to be an 8. When you don't have those things, it's going to be a 6. God, I love this art too. Like, look at him. This is a wizard who enjoys his life. Like, this is the man having fun. Yeah, powerful card, reason to be blue. If you have 2 copies of this and then another think twice, then you should grab it. Yeah, art's great, text is great. This is a fantastic Magic card. Don't worry about where they're taking me. The more pressing question is, why aren't they taking you? Why don't you have a swarm of fairies willing to carry you around? That's on you. All right. Mocking Sprite. This is another Scryfall search. It's weak. One toughness is weak. 1/1 fairies are a thing in this format. Um, so how much mana are you saving here? So let's pretend for a minute that I think a 2 mana 2/1 flyer is great. That means that at a 3 mana 3/1 flyer, I need this to save me at least 2 mana, which means I need at least 2 spells to follow this up. That is not impossible in this set, but it's also not easy. So these are all the cards that are made cheaper here. I know you can't see them. I'm sorry. You can't see them all, but like the ones we really care about are Think Twice. That saves me 2 mana. Think Twice, Mocking Sprite is a nice little combo. It's also nice to be able to play the Mocking Sprite on turn 4, holding up an Essence Scatter or a Runaway Together. But it's really tough to get value out of like a Refute here. So when you already have a ton of instants and sorceries, and especially a ton of Think Twices, Mocking Sprite's a lot better and worth playing. But I wouldn't take it before those. That's a cool thing about Magic. Carl says the art looks like it could be 3 blue ETB get a 1/1 flyer. One of the things that I love about Magic is like if I were to hide all the costs, you could take a guess at what this card does just from the art. Like we're not going to talk more about that right now. I'll be mad. Refute. 3 mana, counter target spell. Almost good enough. Always. Cancel is always almost there. And that's why we tend to see cancel plus something, 3 mana counter target spell plus a thing, perform pretty well. In the last set, we had Twist Reality. That was 3 mana counter target spell or 3 mana Manifest Dread. That option made that card see play. This is a little awkward because like it doesn't draw me 2 cards. I'm not going to play it on my turn very often. I'm going to play it on my opponent's turn. So this draw a card, discard a card isn't a relevant thing. Isn't a relevant thing to do when you are trying to draw your second card in turn, unless you're pairing it with something else. But this is a strong control card. If you're drawing a lot of cards, the ability to get rid of an extra one is relevant. Putting an extra card in your graveyard is relevant to this fail deck. I'm very happy to play this in blue-black or blue-green flash. I'm not so interested in it in blue-white or blue-red. Blue-red in general, not being able to play your spells on demand makes them a little bit weaker. Like Essence Scatter is still strong enough that you can do it without that. But Refute is not something you can play reliably enough to trigger your prowess for blue-red wizards. So yeah, 4 of 3, ceiling of 5. Putting the loot on the cancel makes it a lot more reasonable. Hey Rosalie, how's it going? How's your stream? Oh, thank you. This is just a thick button up. I love this shirt, but I can only wear it when it's really cold out, and it's cold out. Runaway Together. You may see me abbreviate this to RAT sometimes. What a beautiful Magic card. I love Runaway Together. Ceiling of 7, 4 of 3, 5 in the middle ground. It's entirely dependent on what you're picking up. So the more cards you have to pick up with Runaway Together that you're happy to pick up, the better it is. There are not very many in blue, but there are some incredibly powerful ones in other colors. Like there's a 5 mana 1/1 that makes a dragon. Picking that card up and killing your opponent's dragon is great value. 2 mana bounce a creature is close to good enough in this set, but having to bounce a creature, that's really weak. Getting to bounce a creature is very strong. So I love Runaway Together. I'll be playing with it a lot. It's good in Wizards, but when you're being aggressive, that negative tempo does matter. Railing on the counter? Oh, rating. Rating on the counter is 435. 435 medium. All good. Okay, up next we got Rune Sealed Wall. So similar to the turtle, Like, this is a good blocker. Tapping to surveil every turn is solid. It's good value. This actually has this has a lower rating than the turtle, not because of the cost, which is a lot more, but because it's an artifact. There's enough incidental ways to kill artifacts, not enchantments, just artifacts, that the 6 toughness. So, like, I've been saying a lot, these 6 toughness creatures, these 7 toughness creatures, red can't kill them. Red doesn't have a way to kill them. Well, red has a couple good ways to kill a rune sealed wall, including a braid, which they're already very likely to be running. If this weren't an artifact, I would actually be very happy to play it. It's just being an eternal wall that surveils every turn is pretty good. If you're the blue-black graveyard deck, this is a good card. It's a blocker that keeps you alive while you fly, and surveilling 1 every turn is a relevant thing that you can do. But otherwise, I'd probably avoid it. It's just, you don't want your 3-drop blocker to be fragile. The disenchants are just okay. The disenchants are good in this set, but the shatters are great. Self-reflection. Love this card. This is a bad card if you're trying to pay 6 mana every time. This is a good card if you're looting it away or milling it and then flashing it back. There are some pretty good targets. We just happen to have even the cheap. So this card, Self-Reflection, you can judge not just Self-Reflection, but any clone by how good the fail cases are for duplicating it. If I duplicate my 2-drop because you managed to kill my 5-drop, I'm okay with that. If I duplicate my 4-drop because you managed to kill my 3-drop, I'm okay with that. Like, you can't judge a clone by the ceiling of creatures you get to copy. You have to judge it by the floor of cards you get to copy. And blue has a high floor for clones in this set. I also just like milling it or discarding it and flashing it back for value. You do have to have those cards. If you don't have a series of 1, 2, 3, and 4 drops that you would be happy to clone, don't play the card. And if you do, play the card. Ooh, this is just efficient. Don't lock yourself into a situation. So a 5-mana 4/3 flying, when you are really in need of a way to get your opponent dead to have an evasive threat in the air, that's good enough. 4 power on a 5-mana flyer, that's good enough. Draw a card attached to it is absurd. That floor before, that's if you are like a control deck that may not have a creature to attack with, but even the control decks, well, they'll have like a reassembling skeleton or a random token that you can sacrifice to draw a card. But don't feel like you're losing because you play this without drawing a card. Like 5-mana 4/3 flyer, if your opponent has 4 cards in hand and you have 4 cards in hand, you're going to want to try and get the card. But if you're in top deck mode and neither of you have anything in play, just jam it. 4 power flyer ends the game in 5 turns. Or probably a lot less. Just a good flyer. That floor before is not going to happen too often. It's usually going to play much closer to the ceiling of 7, which is 5-mana 4/3 that draws a card. Ooh, tied for the best blue card in the set. Spectral Sailor does it all. So 1-mana 1/1 flash flying. That means that you play on your opponent's turn to trigger your opponent's Dragonborn Cutthroat. That means that for 4 mana, you get to, like, this makes so many worse cards better. But, like, just going down the archetypes, you really want cheap creatures to go with Balmor. You really want a grindy way to draw cards in your blue-black deck. You're going to have a lot of extra mana to draw cards. If you get to 8 mana, that's 2 extra cards every turn, or 1 extra card cast a spell every turn with your Spectral Sailor. And you just want 1 mana flyers, of which there is 1 in blue and 1 in white. This is one of the best uncommons in the set. You can splash it if you're good at putting extra land sources down into slower deck. But, like, you want this in your control deck, and you want this in your aggro deck. You want this for triggering raid. You want this for drawing cards. You want this because it's flying, and you want this because you can play it on your opponent's turn. It's a good card. Strix Lookout. Beautiful. Beautiful magic card. Look at him. Look how dapper this owl is. This is a dapper owl. This is a normal owl that has gained sentience. That is all. Wise, watchful, fashionable. You do this is a cool card because it kind of has a different role in the different archetypes. In blue black, you want to be looting with it, but in blue white, you're just happy to have a flyer, and in blue red, you're happy to have a vigilant body. Vigilance is not an irrelevant keyword in the set. There's a few different things that give you the ability to tap. Fishing rod, we looked at fishing rod 2 days ago, but fishing rod with Strix Lookout is a nice little combo. Like, looting is a valuable thing. 2-mana 1/2 flyer is almost a good enough body on its own, and there's a lot of good ways to grow it. I'm gonna go ahead and lower the floor to a 3, because if you don't have good ways to grow it, then it's a lot worse. But we're assuming that you have good ways to grow it or good uses for the looting. Like, it's a role player in every deck, but unlike a lot of the role players we tend to see, like it helps every archetype. But you're not upset to just have, like, it doesn't have a lot of competition at 2-drops. Think Twice, similar to the Lookout, is a role player everywhere. Like, this is a 2-for-1 in a set where 2-for-1s are good, but Think Twice is such a cool card. So we have seen 5 mana draw 2. That's a little bit weak. Being able to spread it out across 2 turns is a lot better, but this is a set where the casting of this spell is value. Like, if you are if you have prowess triggers, you are happy to have the extra cast of this card. You're happy to do it twice, and you're also happy just looting it away if you drew it off the top. Like, it is a reason to loot away or to mill yourself. Yeah, you'll play it in most blue decks. I might lower the rating. I'm gonna lower the rating to a 4 because it is solid in all the decks, but the competition it has at each point on the 2 and the 3 is pretty high. So, like, if it's Think Twice or Fleeting Distraction, I will usually take the Fleeting Distraction over the Think Twice unless I'm blue-black. If I'm blue-black, I'd rather have Think Twice. But, like, blue-red, blue-white, blue-green, I'd rather have... Well, blue-green, I'd also rather have Think Twice. Yeah, okay, we're dropping it for that. I like that we can do that direct compare. All right. The Return of Tolarian Terror. What a card, what a card. It's a beautiful card. It is much more difficult to cast Tolarian Terror for 1 mana than it was in Dominaria United. So, quick story time. This was the best blue common and one of the best commons in the set, Dominaria United, which is still in standard. That was because Dominaria United had, at common and uncommon, 6 1 and 2 mana spells that drew you a card. All right. I'll be right back. Give me just a sec. Blue cards left. So sorry about that. All right, so wait, where'd my Tolarian Terror go? I must have deleted it. There it is. All right, Tolarian Terror. So in Dominaria United, this was one of the strongest cards in blue. There were 5 different ways to draw cards. There was Impulse, there was Joint Exploration, there was Opt, there was Fleeting Distraction or Timely Distraction, and I can't never remember the last one. But, like, Essence Scatter was also a common. This card is still very good. Opt is not in this set. Good question, Wingspear. So you're very likely you're not going to cast this for 1 mana and hold up counter magic. You will often cast it for 4 mana or 5 mana, and that's still really good. Like a 5 mana 5/5 with ward is something that you're okay playing, and if you can get it for 4 mana on turn 6 and hold up an essence scatter, you're going to be pretty happy with it. Like it is a good reward for playing lots of spells. The downs, like the other thing about this set is you have a little bit more looting cards like Refute, but you have many fewer cards that flashback that leave your graveyard, and there's actual graveyard hate, so you will occasionally have to pay the full 7 mana for this, but it's still a good card, so I gave it a 5 with a floor of 5 and a ceiling of 7, somewhere in the middle for effort. All right, Uncharted Voyage. This is an effect we see a lot. We literally had Vanish from Sight in the last set, which was 4 mana, do target permanent non-land permanence owner puts it on the top or bottom of their library, and you surveil 1. This is the same card, but with fewer targets. However, you might notice it still has a higher rating because blue just has less removal. There's no Unable to Scream. Well, there's a bad Unable to Scream in this set. Well, it's not that much worse. So you're just low on options for blue. You are short on options for removal in blue, so you're happier to have Uncharted Voyage. It's still not great, but it's passable. All right, last card in blue, Witness Protection. So we literally were just doing a Streets of New Capenna draft with Witness Protection, where it was pretty bad. It's pretty bad in that set. It's a lot better in this set, both because there's so many more flyers, and you're very happy disabling a flyer so that you can win in the air. And double blocking just got a lot worse. So the downside to Witness Protection in a lot of sets is if I attack you with my 3/4 and you have a 3/3 and a 1/1, or anything else, you can block with both creatures. Like still having the creature was relevant, and then you could pile your creatures together in order to make sure mine died. Double blocking as a whole is a lot weaker because of the change in how I assign combat damage. And combat tricks are a little bit weaker. It's still not ideal. You have to make sure you have the right deck for giving your opponent a 1/1 for free, and you have to make sure your opponent isn't going to just cast Overrun and kill you with a 4/4 trample anyway. But yeah, the more card draw you have and the more flyers you have, the better Witness Protection is. And you'll have to play it. Like, you have to even take it kind of high, and I'm not too happy about that. But there is something just so much fun about making someone a legitimate business person. Like, Enchanted Creature is a 1/1 legitimate business person. It's just fantastic text. All right, so that's going to be it for the blue cards. We're going to run all the ads now so that I don't get interrupted, and switch over to white, and we're going to take a short 2-minute break, and then we'll do all the white cards. You may notice that all the white cards are really good. All right, be right back. About 2 minutes. demographic. Well, I'll be done in like in 90 minutes. Oh, don't be sorry. Sorry about that. That took longer than I thought. All right, we are on the white cards. So we have gone over all these already. And I will probably cut all that out in just a bit. So blue-white flyers, we just talked a lot about that. Generally, you need your interaction first, then your utility flyers, then your general flyers, and your blockers. Your draw 2 competes a bit with your flash stuff, and you need to identify the playable removal and what you can make work. Try and figure out where the value is, and then whether you're going to need angels or not. We'll talk a lot about angels here. Red-white aggro. So you need your tokens. The things that make tokens. Heroic Reinforcements is a great example. I'm going to go ahead and add things that make tokens and do a thing here. So Heroic Reinforcements is both make tokens and an anthem. Then you need your power creatures, the things that are generating value or just good rares. There's a lot of good rares available. And then your removal after that. Your red removal is very good, and your white removal is a little bit situational, so you'll usually take the red removal first, because the red removal is just very flexible in these decks. You can shoot it at your opponent's face if they don't have a blocker that you need to take out. And then you need your tricks and your anthems. Tricks or your anthems. Like, you'll need a few of each, but if you're attacking with singular powerful creatures, your combat tricks are going to be a lot better. And if you're attacking with a wide, like if you're going wide with lots of different cats and soldiers, then pumping your team is going to be a lot better. you're going to want to kind of lean towards one color or the other. White has a lot more good token producers. Red has a lot more burn spells and singular tricks. Like, it's the difference between give your creatures +2/+0 and make a creature indestructible. Your combat tricks are good and your rares are bombs. Red White has the most ability to utilize the most rares in either red or white. Black White life gain. Generally, you're going to need your payoffs first, things like Fiendish Panda or Rajani's Pridemate, then the removal. You're kind of going to want a lot of it just because you're clearing blockers. You can make up for removal with good protection, but it's tough to find the right protection at the right time. Then your things that gain you life, you don't have to pick it too high because there's lots of incidental life gain. There's lots of things that'll just deal 3 damage, gain 1 life, or be a 1/1 with lifelink. And then the sources for how you're winning the game. So we looked at Marauding Blight Priest in black. That's the card that whenever you gain life, each opponent loses a life. You can grind out a game that way without attacking. You can let your creatures die to make your opponent lose 1 life and you gain 1 life. You can also make a creature unblockable and sack a bunch of creatures to it, or just make a giant creature attack every turn and your opponent will have to block and deal with it. Try and watch your effects as you draft them. Keep account of how much life gain you have, how many payoffs you have. The life gain happens incidentally, but you'll still lean a little bit more. Like, there's a white 1-mana spell, deal 3 to an attacking or blocking creature, gain 1 life. You might take that over a Braid, even if you can. Well, a Braid's a bad example. You might take that over Stab because of the life gain. And then figure out how you're winning. Are you doing it just outvaluing them with your life gain and your size, or draining them slowly over time? And then finally, green-white counters. There are a lot of things that give you counters in this set. The counters are incidental. Like, there's a few good ways to take advantage of the counters, but for the most part, you're just happy because they are making your creatures larger. You're gonna need your removal first because it's a little bit harder to find in green-white. Then protection for your creatures. Being able to keep your creatures alive is incredibly valuable. Then payoffs for the counters. There's only a few of them. You can grab them if you see them. You don't need a lot, but they're nice to have. Then cards that work with your plan. Are you trying to make one creature very large? Are you trying to put counters on everything? Are you just trying to give one creature trample and win with it eventually? And then finally, your combat tricks. These are a little bit separate from protection, but they can be the same. Snakeskin Veil is a combat trick that is also protection, and that flexibility is nice. You should take Snakeskin Veil pretty high in the counters deck. There's higher synergies available in what each deck wants to do. Like, you can go wider and use counters that way. You can go for morbid and use counters to generate tokens. You can go for flyers and just make a flyer really large and keep adding counters to it. And then there are a few actual things with +1/+1 counters on it do a thing. Okay, first card, Ajani's Pridemate Classic reprint. Whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. If this is a 2-mana 3/3, you're very happy. But a 2-mana 2/2 as a fail case is not the worst thing. So in other sets, we've seen this card with like a Soul Warden strategy. Whenever a creature on either side comes into play, gain 1 life, or at the beginning of your upkeep, gain 1 life, and it just grows massive over time. And this one is more going to be a 2/2. Like, if it's a 2/2 that grows once or twice, that's the floor of a 5. And if you have a bunch of the cards that say when a creature comes into play under your control, gain 1 life, that's going to be a 7. But it's usually going to be somewhere in between that, because your incidental deal 3 damage, gain 1 life are just going to grow this, and it'll be just a 2-mana 5/5 or 2-mana 6/6 eventually. Be a little careful because it dies to stab and burst lightning, but not if you have any mana up. Yeah, this is a good card. Angel of Finality, 4-mana 3/4 flyer is almost good enough. Hey, that's a 4. Exiling your opponent's graveyard is very, very good in this set. Black, green, and white all have some amount of recursion, and blue has Tolarian Tear. It values cards in its graveyard. Every color but, well, red a little bit, but colors also have flashback spells. So this feels like incidental value, but it can be worth more than a whole card. So when exiling your opponent's graveyard is relevant to what they're trying to do, if it actively stops what they're doing, it's going to play at that ceiling of a 6, because a 4-mana 3/4 flyer is just a good body. Otherwise, it's going to be close to that 4. You don't need a lot of them. Like, it has diminishing returns in the sense that you don't want 3 or 4 of them, but you'll always play the first copy, and you'll usually play the second or the third. Armasaur Guide, really cool card. 5 mana, 4/4 Vigilance. Like, you want this to be a 5/5 as often as possible. You can play it pre-combat, attack with 3 creatures, and it's a 5 power worth of stuff for 5 mana, but it counts itself. So if you attack with 3 creatures and it gets to put a counter on itself, you're really happy. If it's a 4, that means you're not attacking with 3 creatures at once too often. If it's a 6, it means you have cards like Heroic Reinforcements that you surprise, put down 3 creatures, and put the counter down. Just it's solid. It's a strong card. It dies to Burst Lightning, so if you can put the counter on it right away, you should. But otherwise, it's just good. It's a good 5-drop. Vanishing Light, one of the only one of the only fully clean removal spells in the format, and it is that common. 3 mana exile thing is great. You want to be a little bit faster because there are good incidental disenchants that they might have. But you're going to have more than one thing that they want to free. Just be a little careful with it. It's good removal, and your opponent is going to occasionally spend a spell to crack open your Banishing Light. Still love the art in Banishing Light. I gave it a 6, floor of 4, ceiling of 6. Pretty low effort card. You'll just play it if you're white. You'll occasionally move into white for it, but most colors that can splash white will have access to other removal spells. Cat Collector, up there for best uncommon. Like, it does self-enable. It's a 3 mana 3/2 that makes a food. A 3 mana 3/2 that makes a food is almost good enough on its own. Being able to gain the 3 life to make a cat just once is nice. The nice thing about Cat Collector is, like, if I have something like there's a 3 mana angel, when this creature comes into play, you gain a life. Like, I can do this on my turn and then crack the food at instant speed on their turn to gain a life to make another cat. So, very powerful card. That floor of a 6, that's if you don't have a lot of life gain. Like, if it's mostly self-sustaining and you have maybe a couple foods or a couple spells, that's very good. If you are a dedicated life gain deck, this card is an 8 for you. If you are a Tatiova deck, you might splash this. Cathar Commando. The flexibility of this remains staggering. A 1 toughness creature is still a liability because of the number of 1/1 tokens, but in the event that your opponent has a Cat Collector and also 2 1/1s and they're attacking with everything, you're happy to just play this and trade. Deal 3 damage to an attacking creature. But the gravy of sack this creature, destroy your opponent's Banishing Light is really strong. This is one of the better 2-drops available in the format. And it's certainly one of the better 3/1s available. There we go. I feel like I went really fast for all of that, but I got all the information across, so it's fine. Claws Out. At what point are you happy to cast this spell? 4 mana, give creatures you control +2/+2. That is a spell people have played before quite happily. If you can get this down to 2 mana, you might be able to cast 2 of them in a turn. You aren't going to stress about having a bunch of cats. Like, you just want 1 or 2 cats for this card to be good. Really, this is more of a tokens card. If you are putting tokens into play, you want Claws Out. You want a certain number of anthems in general. The anthems you have available are very good. Heroic Reinforcements, Claws Out, solid cards. That I'm pretty happy to play. Yeah, just good anthems. This 2 toughness is a lot. Like, it means that your creatures are likely to survive that combat. This isn't a card that you'll play just on your big attack the turn you win the game. This is a card you'll play to save 2 creatures. Like, if I have a Cat Collector and 2 cats and my opponent blocks 2/2, 4/4, 2/2, then I'll play the Cat Claws Out and we'll trade 1 creature and I'll eat 2 others. It's a powerful trick. The closer you can get to that ceiling. I'm not happy playing this for 5 mana. I would want to be paying 4 or 3, ideally. 2 is great, but 4 or 3 is fine. Dauntless Veteran, powerful anthem, fairly fragile. It's fine. Like, I would rather, the reason this rating is so low relative to other things, right, paying 5 mana is not the worst thing. This card is not a bad card. This effect has competition. Like, this effect is competing with Literal Overrun, Heroic Reinforcements, and Claws Out. And being attached to a body is solid, but being attached to a fragile body is kind of tough. it does attack as a 3/3, which is nice. But if you're going to combat and your opponent's just burst lightning it, that might ruin your combat. The other thing is, like, the tokens decks, the competition that the tokens deck specifically has at 3 mana for cards that they desperately want to play is pretty big. The 3 drops that white has are fantastic. So I gave it a 4 with a floor of 4. It's usually going to play at that floor. In a tokens deck without other anthems, it'll play closer to a 5. And when this does the thing, it's going to feel great. Like, when this does what you wanted to do when you play it on turn 3 and then heroic reinforcements on turn 4, that's going to win you the game. But it's going to win you the game because of heroic reinforcements, not because of the Dauntless Veteran. So pick order wise, it is a little lower. Dazzling Angel. This card is flexible and it fits into most white decks. Breaking down the white archetypes, you're very happy to have this when you can put counters on it. You're very happy to have this in flyers. You desperately want it in the life gain deck, and it's a little weak in red-white aggro. So I gave it a 5 in the dedicated life gain deck. This is the best version of this effect, and this is a great version of this effect because the body isn't bad. Like, a 3-mana 2/3 flyer is just something I would play in this set. A 3-mana 2/3 flyer, when gaining a life, like when I can play a Fiendish Panda the turn after it, and my Fiendish Panda is a 4/3, that's fantastic. If my Fiendish Panda is a 4/3 and it also grows my turn 2 Ajani's Pridemate, that's fantastic. This is a linchpin common. Yeah, it's usually going to be closer to that floor of a 5. In the life gain deck, it's a 7. In the Flyers deck, it's a 6. But mostly it's a 5. Like, the Flyers deck does have better flying options available. This would be a filler flyer. But it's also nice when you're racing. Divine Resilience. This one's getting a revisit. There's, like, it doesn't save your creature from a stab. It does save your creature from a burst lightning. It does save your creature from a combat. And the kicker's good. Like, surviving a Day of Judgment is good. Surviving your own Day of Judgment at 8 mana is good. And it's a combat trick that bypasses the double blocking complaint that I've been having. Like, if I'm blocking with one creature and I Divine Resilience to make my creature live, that's good. And if I'm double blocking, then Divine Resilience means you don't get a 2-for-1, like if I kick it. But it's tough to get the full value out of this. Like, the full value out of this is I'm blocking your 3/3/3s with my 3/3/3s, and then they all are now indestructible. And when you do, it's gonna feel fantastic. But it's also got competition. Isn't that weird? They gave this competition. It's a worse card. Oh, my dog needs to get out of this room. It's a worse card than Inspiring Call. Water, buddy, I get it. Go drink. Yes, it is a worse card than Inspiring Call, but the 1 mana option is there and real. And the protection is good. It would be better if it protected from more removal spells. But if we just look at the removal spells that we've looked at, there's a lot of cards that shrink, and there's a card that shrinks, and there's a few that exile, and it doesn't protect against the blue removal spells. But it protects against most of the red removal spells and most of the black removal spells. So it's a cool card, but it's getting a revisit for me. This is one I'm not sure on. I'm going to have to play with it. Felidar Savior. If you curve into this, so this is a really powerful card if you get to use both counters. You're right, Sashmo. It does protect against Wrath, even your own Day of Judgment, which is nice. If you curve into this, if you go 2-drop, 3-drop Felidar Savior, it's very strong. The lifelink is relevant. This is a functional reprint of the Basri's Disciple. 4 mana 2/3 lifelink, same thing. Or 4 mana, maybe it was a 2/2. But like, this is a relevant body. If this is a 4 mana 3/4 lifelink, you're comfortable with that. Ideally, you want to put some counters on 2 flyers because it can't put the counters on itself. The lower your curve, the better this card is. This is a good thing to curve into. It makes your 1-drops better and it makes your 2-drops better. Like, but if I can go 2-mana flyer, 3-mana flyer, Felidar Savior, this is a great blocker on the ground, and both of those flyers are hitting a lot harder. Yeah, not a ton to say about it. Just curve into it. Lifelink is a relevant stat line here. There's very few lifelinkers, and there's no cheap lifelinkers. I think there's one cheap lifelinker, and it is a good card. Fleeting Flight. This might be the best combat trick. Putting a counter on it is great. Making it suddenly a blocker is great. And preventing all combat damage is solid. Like, it does let target creature win or survive a combat, and it lets you jump into the air to get a block off. We have seen these effects be strong because they're a little bit more flexible. You can pay 1 mana to jump a creature in for the lethal attack to finish them off. It kind of has diminishing returns, but I like the card a lot. It doesn't protect against a lot of the target removal like Snakeskin Veil does, but it does. I gotta lower it. It's got to be a 4. Like, it's got so much competition. The 1 mana protection tricks are all so good that they all have to come down a little bit. Like, yes, this is a powerful card, but if I'm in green-white, I'm gonna have to struggle between this and Giant Growth. And if I am in just white, I will sometimes take Divine Resilience over it. The different combat tricks do a lot. Correctly predicting which combat tricks your opponent has is going to be really difficult in this set because holding up 1 white mana could be 2 very different feeling spells. I'll probably have to revisit this one too, but a whole counter forever. This might be a 5 still. We're giving this a revisit. Like, Jump Scare was very good in Duskmourn, and that was a stronger set, and this size increase is permanent. Having the counter is relevant too. All right, we're going to leave it on 5. I think it's good. Sorry, Carl. Guarded Air. A 6 mana for 7 power spread across 3 bodies is really good. So I often say it's difficult to play a 6-drop that dies to removal. This doesn't die to removal. Like, you get to play your 6-drop. Your opponent will have to. 3/3s are real threats. Your opponent has to kill both of the 3/3s, and the 1/1 lifelink body powers up pretty well. The 1 lifelink incidental life gain is going to be very relevant, isn't it? Though, Thane, like, it makes 2 3/3s and is a 1/1 lifelink. Like, all 3 of these bodies are going to be relevant for your game. But you can blink it. You can play Run Away Together to pick up your Guarded Air, put out 2 more 3/3s. You can fake its death, gain 3 life, put out 2 more 3/3s and a lifelink token. This is a good top end for white. Even the more aggressive decks aren't too upset about having the bodies. But a lot of the more aggressive decks won't be playing won't want too many 6-drops. I'm going to go ahead and raise the ceiling to a 7 because if you can blink it a lot, you're really happy. But I like 5 for the base rake. Solid card. Like, lots of little pieces all adding together. That's right. That's right, Satchmo. That's right, Thane. They are royal guards. They have been trained. They are experienced. Oh, so everyone else knows knights are traditionally 2 mana, they're 2/2s with vigilance. So having 3/3s with no keyword, they're less vigilant. You can see that they're less vigilant. They're not even looking at her. That's cool. Heir Apparent. I had to go back to this one a few times. The 2-drops are just really good in white. Like, this is competing with your other 2-drops, and for it to be a 2-drop you want, you need lights. I wouldn't play it over a Cathar Commando or a Johnny's Pridemate until I had 4 or 5 of them, and like it then. Your 2-drops, what is the role that they play in your game? Like, generally, your 2-drop is trying to trade with your opponent's 2-drop, keep you alive, and push some damage through. Like, you're supposed to not be upset when your opponent stabs your 2-drop. But for that to be the case, I need to, on turn 3, play a Heir Apparent that's not using my mana well, and then maybe turn 4, play 2 Heir Apparents. If you want to do it, go for it. Like, getting a lot of these is solid. But even in the token strategy, there are good 2-drops that I'd rather have over Heir Apparent. It is a little awkward. It's a really cool card. I'm glad they made it. If there's something at rare, like if I don't know about the rares, but if there's like a Rally of the Ancestors, oh, that's exactly what I was thinking about, Carl. We're gonna go ahead and look at that. So I assumed they would put something like that. Raise the pass. Okay, return all creatures with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. That makes this card a lot better. That is why I gave it the ceiling of a 5. You can first pick that and force Heir Apparents. Like, it's just tough to run. Like, that's not good enough on its own, right? If I revive 4 2/2 Heir Apparents, they all trigger each other, but then I still want an Anthem or something to close out the game. Like, it's playable. And sometimes if you see one table, like if you can get 4 or 5 of them, it'll work. But I think you need 4 or 5 of them before they're better than the other 2-drops. Healer's Hawk. This is the card you want in your life gain deck and in your Flyers deck. You want to play it before your Pride Mate and then just gain a life every turn. Let's break it down a little bit. 1 mana, 1/1, flying, lifelink. This is a format where lifelink and flying are relevant keywords. If you can make the lifelink and the flying more relevant, that ceiling is going to be a 6. Like it's going to play like a 6. And if you can't, it's going to be still a reasonable card, a 4/4. Like if you are truly in a situation where you just need a speed bump, gaining a life off your speed bump is not the worst thing. But if I know I'm the life gain deck or the Flyers deck, I'll take it pretty high. Also, if I have Goldvein picks, Goldvein pick Healer's Hawk is really tough to beat. Like gaining 2 life and making a treasure every turn is difficult for your opponent to deal with, even with the other flying blockers. You just make a treasure every turn, you use that treasure to cast removal spells. Yes, it is great on rate. All right, up next, Helpful Hunter. 2 mana, 1/1, draw a card. This card's value is directly proportional to how well you use any random body. There's a lot of decks that are great at using any random body. Like I really want it in red-white specifically. Otherwise, the cards, it works more with specific cards than any card. Like it's great with Good Fortune Unicorn. It's a great card to revive with Fiendish Panda. It's great if I'm sacrificing creatures. It's great if I'm picking them up. None of these are things that happen automatically. They are all things that you need to add cards for. Thank you so much for the follow, H4Up. I'm slightly suspicious of your name, but okay, great. I'm no longer suspicious of your name. Thank you so much. So that's why I like this card. It has a slightly higher rating than normal. Yes, it is a control card. It is a control card or a tokens card, and I'm very happy to play it on either end of the spectrum. And since I'm very likely to be on either end of that spectrum in white, I gave it a 6, and it's usually going to play like a 6. It's difficult to pick up nothing that works well with the Helpful Hunter if you are taking random white cards. You do want to have those random white cards, but you got to put a little thought into that. But it's just never a card I'm too sad to play. Yes. So great. So H4Up says that this is a worse spirited companion. It is a worse spirited companion because it's not an enchantment and we don't have enchantment specific synergies. But the set is designed such that the synergies for it are there. Like Helpful Hunter is really good when you're curving into a Felidar Savior. It's really good when you need to trigger a little bit of life gain. It's really good when you care about having cats in play. It's really good when it just is a 2/2, or when you just need to have bodies. So comparing to Spirited Companion is great. Spirited Companion was a good card because you could always recur Spirited Companion or use the enchantment aspect of Spirited Companion. One of those two things was always true. That's not the case here. It doesn't have cases that are always true or strong cases that are easy, but it has so many small positive synergies in white alone. Inspiring Paladin. So we talked a lot about how 3 mana 3/3s are just good in this format. 3-mana 3/3s are just good in this format. You would play a vanilla 3-mana 3/3 in this format. This is a 3-mana 3/3 with first strike. This bit, creatures you control with +1/+1 counters have them on with +1/+1 counters on them, is just gravy. It's really good gravy. Like, if I have a Hunter's Paladin out, suddenly all of my combat tricks that give +1/+1 counters also give first strike. That means that my opponent can't block anything safely. This is a really good, this is a very strong card. So I gave it a 5 with a floor of a 5. It's almost always just going to be a good, solid 3-drop. In the counters deck, it's a 6. Everywhere else, it's just a good card. A 3-mana 3/3 with first strike is good enough. Even if you're not a counters deck, there are enough cards in white that put counters on things that creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have first strike is a the threat of activation is a relevant line of text. Also important to note, during your turn, this creature has first strike. It also has first strike. No, like, it just is redundant. That's not relevant to what we're talking about, so we're not going to worry about it right now. All right, moving on. Oh, yes. There have been other cats that draw H4. Not in this set, though. All right, up next, Joust Through. Great design on this card. So 1 mana, deal 3 to attacking or blocking creature is good in this set. It's just good enough. It's a good trick. This gain 1 life is great with all of the life gain synergies. You're very happy to just play it in your deck with Cat Colony or with a Johnny's Pridemate. It's a good trick. If you have a Johnny's Pridemate and an Inspiring Paladin, then your Joust Through will gain you 1 life, put a counter on the Johnny's Pridemate, which will now have first strike. Really good. Oh, then we'll take a look at that later. I am curious to know what other, I don't know if it's on Arena, so we might get it for Foundations. There's some cool cats available. All right, yeah, but Joust Through is just a good removal spell. Comparing it to Stab, Stab kills most things, and in a vacuum, you would rather have Stab than Joust Through. If you're a life gain deck, you'd rather have Joust Through than Stab, and that's a real pick you will have to make. You will have both Joust Through and Stab available in your black-white deck, and you'd rather have Joust Through. Foundations is coming to Arena H4. We are specifically doing a draft set review today, but we're getting Pioneer Masters soon. So a second cat that draws a card would make cats viable in Explorer, which I would be really excited to see. Like, the thing we're missing for cats on Arena in Explorer is Brimaz. The 3-mana 3/4, whenever it attacks or blocks, you make a cat. I want to play cats in Explorer on Arena so badly, so I will take a look at cats as soon as this is over, okay? Because I want to see what's available. There is another cat that draws a card, but I think it's 3 mana, and I need to know this. Generous Stray out of Origins is on Arena. That's a 3 mana 1/2 when it comes into play, draw a card. That's not quite there, although we might do Collected Company, and then that would get it there. But I'd love to talk more about Explorer. We'll do that soon, okay? Up next, Luminous Rebuke. This is an inherently defensive removal spell. This is a good defensive removal spell. I'm happy if this is 2 mana destroy target creature, that's very good. If this is 5 mana destroy target creature, then you are taking out a blocker. So this is not a removal spell that aggressive decks want, but any defensive speed deck will be very happy to have it. Specifically, Black-White Life Gain. It will excel in Black-White Life Gain because you are happy. Black-White Life Gain is great at winning through a stalled board, so you get to force your opponents to attack first and pick off the pesky threats with Luminous Rebuke. But the flexibility is nice. It's a good card. Make Your Move. This one's getting a revisit, but I'm happy with the rating. So this is a reprint. I was pretty happy to play it in Murders of Karlov Manor. Most decks... All decks will eventually have targets for this spell. It's a matter of when you're able to play it. Like, looking at just the white cards, Ajani's Pridemate. This can't kill Ajani's Pridemate until you need it to kill Ajani's Pridemate. So make your move is a slightly better removal spell than usual. The reason that I'm giving it a revisit is I am not sure how many copies of this card I am comfortable playing, and I really won't be until I get to play. See, this isn't even about what's good, it's about what other people are actively playing. Like, there are enough key cards, like Tatiova, for instance, or Empyrean Eagle. Your removal spell not being able to hit a Balmor or a Tatiova or an Eagle is a problem. But like with Balmor, it'll get big enough for you to hit, but is that going to be too late? So I gave it a 4 floor of 3, ceiling of 5. I think it just has diminishing returns, and I'm usually going to be happy playing one copy. You'll sort of be able to you'll be able to build your own. So yes, H4, this is a bad destroy evil, but this is draft. So destroy evil is a Dominaria card, and that's a good comparison. Thank you. Since you just arrived, I only answer questions between slides, but I will answer every question. So destroy evil was destroy target enchantment or destroy target creature with toughness, power toughness, I can't remember which one, 4 or greater. Destroy evil in a limited format is entirely contextual. So 2 mana, let's use the rebuke, destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. It's about your targets. So like if your opponent is playing 6 mana 6/6s, then yeah, make your move is really good. But if your opponent is playing Empyrean Eagles, then they're winning with 3/3s in the air. And if your opponent is playing heroic reinforcements, they're winning with a wide range of 2/2s on the ground. And that would make this a lot weaker. But in both of those situations, their best removal spells are enchantments. So your fail case decks will still have banishing lights that you can target. And that goes for blue decks too. So like it's more about like when my opponent is playing a Balmor Instant Sorceries deck, yes, I can kill the Balmor with Make Your Move, but that's too slow. So we're not saying that this is playable or unplayable right now, H4. We are evaluating when it's good. The artifact point is relevant, but there's only a few reasonable targets. So the floor of a 3, that says that we probably don't want too many copies of this card, and we want to make sure we have other removal spells. I'll play Make Your Move, but if I have a Luminous Rebuke and a Banishing Light already, and a Cathar Commando, if those 3 cards are already in my pool, I will still play it. Hey, don't be quiet. I like your questions. Questions are a good thing. Like, if it's truly a question that I don't think deserves my attention, then I won't answer. But you have not asked a question yet that doesn't deserve the attention. These are all good questions. Breaking this down is useful. All right, up next we have Mischievous Pup. Ooh, that's a good question. I hadn't counted. Can you ask that again in a minute, Carl? We're going to go check that after we get a few cards down, okay? That is something I haven't counted yet. Up next, Mischievous Pup. This card, so 1 toughness creatures are a liability. Saving your creature is great. So, like, if we say... So how much is your 1/1 worth? How much is the... We're going to swap these. Normally, we're going to do Pup after this. Prideful Parent. 3 mana 2/2. Make a 1/1. That's pretty good in this set. There are good 3/1s in this set. That 1/1 is a valuable thing to trade off. Vigilance is relevant, although not crazy. This is a good card in this set. Prideful Parent is actively strong. Making 2 bodies on 1 card is just something that white wants to do as often as possible. It's mostly going to only be a 6 in the tokens deck, but it's going to be playable everywhere else, and you will make it better with cards like Mischievous Pup. So the problem... Yes, so I love Mischievous Pup. Mischievous Pup is good in this set, but not for free. So if we go back to where this is first printed in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, Mischievous Pup was easy to make worth 2 cards because you could just save your Inspiring Paladin from a removal spell. If you were just picking this up, this is a 3-mana 3/1 flash, draws a card, trades with something. Cards like Mischievous Pup are going to be worth 2 cards at the cost of making your opponent's Prideful Parent worth 2 cards. Like, this 1/1 trading with Mischievous Pup means that if you're only saving your creature, that's going to be down a card. The more cards like Helpful Hunter you have, or Guarded Heir, the better the pup gets. I want to already have those cards, but the pup can get kind of ridiculous. Like, there's a 5-mana 1/1 that puts a 4/4 dragon into play. The more you want those cards before you have the pup. If you have the pup, you need to take those cards. Like, this is a high synergy card. I'm really hoping it's great. There's a lot of good 2-drops that generate a little value too, like our next card, Resolute Reinforcements. This is just always a good card. 2 mana for 2 bodies with flash is very good. You can blink it or return it to your hand and recast it. You get value out of playing spells on your opponent's turn, and you get value out of having 2 bodies. This is a powerful 2-drop. White's 2-drops are really good. Like, other colors competing with White's 2-drops are going to find themselves lacking. You should also do your best to be aware of all. There are 3 different cards that make 2 1/1s at instant speed, right? Resolute Reinforcements, the 3-mana instant that makes 2 fairies, and the 3-mana instant that makes 2 goblins. That means that you have to be careful in how you attack with your 3/1s. If I have 2 Mischievous Pups in play and my opponent has mana up, I need to attack with 1 at a time so that I don't get blown out. Like, 1 toughness is a liability on creatures you want to attack with because it lets your opponent pay 2 mana to kill 2 creatures. Up next, Savannah Lions. It just doesn't really have a home. It's difficult to be aggressive enough for your 1-mana 2/1 to be strong. Everything but blue has 3 toughness creatures available at 2 mana, which means that even on the play, this is not likely to get in for a ton of damage before your opponent just walls it. There is a rare cat that makes Savannah Lions good. That is all. Other than that, I don't think it's worth it unless you're as aggressive as possible. And there aren't a lot of great 1-drops, but like, I will play a Healer's Hawk and I will pick a Healer's Hawk over Savannah Lions every time in every deck, even with the rare cats. So yeah, slightly homeless. We've come a long way. This used to be one of the best creatures in Magic, in all of Magic. Isn't that wild? Similar to Sarah Angel. This also used to be one of the best creatures in all of Magic. There is a this is a classic card. This used to be an unbeatable bomb in a lot of core sets. You would take this first and be really happy. And this set is just kind of fine. Like, it's a good body. A 5-mana 4/4 flyer is a good body, but it dies to removal and it kind of wins the aerial battle, which is nice. It's pretty much always going to play like a 5. Like, it's better if you have more protection, but that's not high. That's not high difficulty. Just play Magic with this card. It's a low effort card. It attacks, it blocks, it's cool. It's a good stat line for 5 mana. 5 mana 4/4 flyers just are good. You can add all this extra text, but you don't need a lot of extra text to make a 4/4 flyer good. Oh, all right, we'll go back. Savannah Lions. It's going to be weaker defensively, in general. Like, a 2/1 is not a good body on defense. Your opponent's combat tricks are now always going to win the combat. Like, and it's difficult to draw enough cards that you're happy with the Savannah Lions. Yes, this card is not good compared to the plane cycling ones, but Vigilance is better in the air than it is on the ground. And there is not a plane cycling one in this set. Like, all of these cards are being judged against the other cards that you can play with them with. This is cool because, like, you can okay, so a lot of the times murder is in the set. 3 mana to destroy a target creature. You can tell a lot about the whole of the set by how good murder is in that set. You can tell a lot about the whole of this set by how good Sarah Angel is in this set. So for right now, this is a good sized body. It doesn't die to a braid, and most of what kills it will cost a similar amount of mana. But if you can keep it alive, this ends the game in 5 turns. Great question, H4. Is Foundations a set? Sorry, I'm not making fun of you. Like, that is a really good question. Foundations is a set, and then the draftable portion of Foundations is separate. So if we go over to Scryfall real quick, oh, you can't see that because of how I have things set up. So when you search on Scryfall, you can type in set FDN, and you will see all of the standard legal sets that we have available in Scryfall. If you want to see what's draftable, you have to type in set Foundations is booster. So not every card is available in the draftable portion of the set. I think Foundations as a whole is like 600 cards, but the draftable portion is about 380 cards. It's only slightly more than usual in the draftable portion. So that's because like the Foundations Commander cards, the Foundations Starter Deck cards, the Foundations Jumpstart cards, those are all standard legal. So yes, good question. All right, up next, Squad Rallier. This is a great card to have 1 copy of. It doesn't stack very well. It doesn't trigger on itself, and you need to make sure you have enough hits. Let's say you have a 40 card deck. We're not going to count all the cards you draw and all the lands. In your 40 card deck, you have 17 lands. In the deck that wants this card, you will have 17 lands. You'll have, let's say, generously, 6 removal or combat tricks. That is, shoot, why can't I do math all of a sudden? That is 17 creatures, like very generously 17 creatures in your set. If you assume that one of them is Squad Rallier, that puts you down to 16 creatures. If you assume that 3 of them are larger, like Sarah Angel, that puts you down to 13 creatures. Like, in a given deck, you will likely have 10 hits for Squad Rallier. That means that if you look at the top 4 cards, and 10 of them are hits, then you have a 40%, wait, 25, I can't do math suddenly, I'm too tired. So I did the math earlier and wrote it down and I don't know where it is, but you need to make sure that you can reliably hit this every activation for this to be good. But in the right deck, if you're activating this 2 times on your opponent's end step, that gives you a really solid late game. And you do have the ability to win from there by hitting cards like Resolute Reinforcements and Prideful Parent, and then just dropping a Heroic Reinforcements. Like, it's a good late game plan. It is a lot, H4. Draft is the most difficult format. That's why we do this. But yes, there's a lot of Magic cards. Foundations is a good set. All right, so Stroke of Midnight. This is the same. So this is. We'll talk about that more in a minute, H4. I have a positivity rule right now, and I will be super negative about this as soon as we finish this set review. But we're only there's only 3 cards left. So, Stroke of Midnight, destroy any non-land permanent, turn it into a 1/1. It's been really weak in other sets, but you can have 2/2s to block, and you can, like, any permanent is pretty relevant. Giving your opponent 1/1 is real. They get to use that 1/1 token, and that's going to be pretty valuable to them in general. But it's going to be worth some amount of the time. Like, I would often play the first copy. Just be very careful with it. You can't give them a permanent every time. I'm sorry, we have more than 3 cards. I was just scrolling poorly. Reasonable removal, not good removal. Better than it was in Wilds of Eldraine by a lot. This is a Wilds of Eldraine reprint. Sunblessed Healer. So it has, this one I came back to and lowered it a lot. Because in the past, a variably costed 3/1 lifelink or kicker pick up a 2-drop was, I'm raising the difficulty to medium on this. was really good. Like, this is still a good body. A 2-mana 3/1 lifelink is a great body if you have the removal or ability to grow it. And the kicker is really nice. There are some strong 2-drops that you can pick up. There are even strong non-creature 2-drops you can pick up. But being a 3/1 is a tough stat line, and you're going to have to put a little effort into getting around that. I'm also raising the ceiling. Sorry, Carl. But yeah, it's not as good as it would be in other sets. It's still pretty good. Yeah, I gave it a floor of a 3, ceiling of 6, and it's usually going to play closer to that 5. It just depends on what you can pick up with it. Twin Blade Blessing. This is a good combat trick. It's just very expensive. White doesn't have a ton of creatures that you want to give this to. It doesn't have a ton of gigantic creatures, but green does and blue does. So I gave it a ceiling of 5 with a pretty high effort required to get there. The creatures that most want this card are rares. Or have ward. Like, if you can put this on a Tolarian, like, it's just awkward. Tolarian Terror is one of the best cards for receiving the Twin Blade Blessing, but Tolarian Terror also doesn't want you to play instants and sorceries. It is tough for white specifically. Like, the cards you want to put it on are things like Sunblessed Healer when your opponent blocks, but it's a good combat trick. So, in general, auras have a weakness of your opponent plays a removal spell, and now both of your cards are gone. You just got 2 for 1. That adds up over time, and you'll die. But you get to kill a creature when you play it if your opponent is tapped out. So then even if they kill it later, it's not going to hurt so much. So it's not that this card is bad. It's that you need to know what you want to put it on before you draft it. Know what you're putting it on before you draft it. That's why the score is so low. If you have good rares, if you have a series, like, it is really difficult to have all the 2-drops that you want to put this on. Because you don't want to put it on a Resolute Reinforcements. You don't want to put it on a Prideful Parent. You don't want to put it on your Hunter. You might put it on the Healer's Hawk, but it's a little bit redundant on an Inspiring Paladin. Like, all the cards you want to put this on aren't in this color, and because it has 2 white pips, it is difficult to play with those cards, but it's not impossible. Right. It is a more narrow trick. It's a very powerful trick with a Sunblessed Healer, but if you don't reliably have a Sunblessed Healer on turn 2, it's not going to be good enough for you. So you can't really pick it early. The flash is nice. All right, Vanguard Seraph. The gaining life to Surveil is relevant and strong, but not free. The stat line of a 4-mana 3/3 flyer is a little bit weak, but the life gain deck wants filler payoffs. The flying deck wants filler flyers. I would be a little unhappy if I had played it in any of the other decks, but like, some of those decks just need flyers, and you'll have to play it. You'll have to fill in the flying slots, even with the 4-mana 3/3 flyer. It'll usually play somewhere between a 3 and a 5. It's a fine card. That's just not great. All right, last card of the set review. And it's a doozy. It's a Youthful Valkyrie. If this is a 2-mana 1/3 with flying, it's okay. Like, it's not great. It's so much more likely to just be larger than that. Having your 2-drop flyer not die to a burst lightning or a stab, and then continue to grow over the course of the game is great. If you are playing white and you are heavy white, you are likely to have a few angels, just as a quick check. Type angel. Angels, there's a lot of good rare angels, but the thing about the angels in this set is Angel of Finality, Dazzling Angel, Sarah Angel are all just good enough to play on their own. And Vanguard Seraph, well, actually, the other common angel not being good enough to play on its own means that I'm lowering the floor to a 4. But it's still going to be on average a 5, somewhere between a 4 and a 6. And it does get out of hand fast. If you can be a 3/5 angel, the card is fantastic. See, but that's the thing, is alone, it's just fine. It's not that it's just like a 2-mana 1/3 flyer is a good enough stat line in this set. I will play a 2-mana vanilla 1/3 flyer in this set. All right, that is going to do it for the Foundations set review. If you want to see me playing this set, I'll be doing it next Monday. I'm working on my draft guide. I'll do my best to get it done. If you have any questions, please let me know. And if you are able to do it late, like if you are able to, this isn't meant to be something you have to watch the entirety of all the time. This is something that you can see what card and the problems with it and what you need around it. Go find it. It is all out in alphabetical order, nearly. And the other two parts are up on YouTube. This one will go up tomorrow.